Hello everyone, welcome back to the latest episode of This Is Why We Stand. I am your host, Joe Archino, and I am so excited. Today, people have been asking for a long time, when are you going to get Randy Jurgensen back on the program? And I'm very happy to say that we have Randy back in, and so much more material to cover. But Randy, it really is so exciting. I'm so honored to have you back with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me back, and let me say right off the bat, it's an honor to do this show. It truly is.
Well, that means so much to me, and I know we had a little bit of an obstacle in getting here, but we're here, and that's all that matters, Randy.
That's all that matters is right, we're here.
Now, again, we highlighted so much of your military career last time, talking about your service in the Korean War, and it was just fascinating material. But you've lived such an amazing life. For anyone who didn't get to hear the first interview, I really think you will enjoy it. But Randy is here again. But obviously, Randy served in the Korean War. He fought in the Battle of Pork Chop Hill, Bronze Star recipient, Purple Heart recipient, and he served 20 plus years as a detective in New York City, and that's one of the highlights of what we'll be talking about today, and then went on to have a very, very great career as an actor. If you've seen The Godfather, which I'm sure many of you have, that's probably one of the things you'll recognize him the most from killing Sonny Corleone, and there's some fascinating stuff behind that. But Randy, first and foremost, I think the book Circle of Six, which I've thoroughly enjoyed reading through in preparation for this interview, Sonny Grosso, your partner, the two of you, him of course of fame to the French Connection. But one of the things I think is so important, and you and I were just talking about, is the military connection between the two of you. So what could be a better way to start than that relationship that the two of you shared?
Well, first, Joe, I'd like to give a shout out to all veterans, all veterans listening, all veterans out there. Thank you for your service. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you for your service. I'd also like to give a shout out to all of my fellow police officers who worked with me and have remained friends for all of these years, especially those from the 2-8 precinct, starting with Timmy Motto. When I was a kid, I was born and raised in West Harlem, virtually on 125th Street. I was born at home. And Sonny Grosso, who has 2, 3, 4, 5 years on me, was born on the east side of Manhattan, and he was raised in a very heavy populated Italian area at that particular time. Where I was raised from 125th Street up to 135th Street, that was called Vinegar Hill because it was very, very highly Irish population. In fact, they spoke with a brogue. So about 6 or 7 years after Sonny was born, he moved over to Vinegar Hill. And of course, I was 10 blocks below that and 5 years younger than Sonny. At 16, I fudged my age, and I went into the military. Sonny, being 20 at that particular time, he upped his draft. In other words, he volunteered to be drafted. I did not know this at the time, and he didn't know that about me at the time. And we went to Korea. Sonny wound up in the Signal Corps, I guess sending Morse code or whatever they do.
A lot of intelligence gathering and things like that.
Absolutely. He was not in a combat frontline situation. He, however, there were a number of occasions where they were under fire. Obviously, it was an up and down war, if you know what I mean, or a police action, whatever you want to call it at the time. So when we came home, one of the things that really faced us when we came home was that we were totally, really, and completely forgotten. It wasn't even called a war. You know, only after 53,000 died in less than 3 years in Korea, they called it a war. We first went, President Truman, Congress would not enact an act of war to send us, so Truman sent us anyway, and it was called a police action. It morphed into being a Korean conflict. And by the way, today, as I sit here, Joe, it's not been resolved.
No, it has not.
It has not been resolved. So when we came home, besides facing being forgotten about and being told how does it feel to be part of a group that lost the first war that America had ever been in. We lost that war. So, and one of the biggest things was there was no jobs. There was no jobs. Now, now I knew Sonny. Now I knew Sonny Grosso. I knew him very, very well. We played stickball together. And we joined a club, and it was called 2626. And we received $26 a week for 26 weeks because there were no jobs. You know, obviously in 1951, 1952, the Second World War is over 5 years, 6 years, and all of those soldiers, sailors, airmen, whatever you want, they're coming home and they're taking all the jobs. They're absolutely
starting their lives after that conflict.
Exactly. So we belong to that club. And I remember, like it was yesterday, we were playing stickball up by the church on 120th Street. Huge, big church. Grant's tomb is up there. It's considered West Harlem. And we were playing stickball, and one of the guys, and his name is Mike Trainer, he would later marry Sonny Grosso's sister. However, we were all single. And he came with some applications, and the applications he had were for the post office, the Department of Parks, the police department. I really don't remember the fire department, and there were other ones that he came. Now, I took the Parks Department, I took the Post Office, which is a federal job, and I took the Police Department. Now, I had no intentions, Joe, of joining any one of those, I'll call them organizations, be police, postman. I didn't know what exactly I was going to do. I wound up working a very good job. I wound up unloading bananas, very, very good pay. Down on the west side, I worked on the docks. I worked on the docks. And so after filling out the applications, the police department called. Now, unbeknownst to me, the police department had called Sonny Grosso before we got these applications, right? So he was on the police force a year and a half before I was to join the police department. They called. So I had some difficulty becoming a police officer because I was doing some things in the streets, like
which you talk about in the book a little bit, which is one of the things that kind of helped you when you were a detective, right?
Yeah, I was taking
numbers,
illegal numbers. I was steering to what they call a wire room, where people would go and bet on the horses and things like that. I was doing that when I was 12 years old, and of course I got caught. So now I'm coming on to the police department. Every word I'm going to tell you is the truth. And so I continued. I continued taking numbers, actually just picking up the numbers and picking up the money, and I would turn it into a man by the name of Clint in Blackshear. Everybody in my neighborhood knew Clint. Clint was the kind of a bookmaker, numbers taker, and we had people in my neighborhood that were actually put out on the street.
That was the Candyman from the book, right?
Exactly. They could not, and I don't want to mix up Candyman with taking numbers with taking drugs. No drugs involved. So we had a number of people that were actually put out on the street, Joe. They were put out on the street because they couldn't pay their rent. And he would come along and pay the rent, and all the kids in my neighborhood, we would get together and we would pick up the furniture and we would bring it back, put it back back into the house. Why that never happened to us is because we were superintendents. We didn't have to pay rent. We virtually had a little bit of an income from being superintendents, and our telephone was free. The landlord paid for our telephone. So I now am going into the police academy. And of course, I'm still doing steering for the wire room, and I'm still doing picking up the numbers. So one day I'm standing actually on 125th Street because they moved the wire room, and the players would come to me and say, "Where is it today, Randy?" And I would give them the address. And so one of them came to me that I really didn't recognize and asked me where it was. And I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am a New York City police officer, and you are under arrest." And his partner came over, and they were going to arrest me for the numbers and for steering. And I said to them, I said, "Look," I said, "I don't know if this means anything, but I'm in the police academy to become a police officer." I wish I could describe or show you the look on their face, And after the language and calling me names that they were calling me and so forth and so on, of course they let me go. And really, that was the end of me taking the numbers.
The ultimate wake-up call, huh?
Absolutely. Now, I just want to go a little fast forward with that story. I want to finish it off. Of course, I go to the police academy, I graduate, and they assign me to a precinct in Spanish Harlem, the 25th precinct. Hi, guys from the 2-5. Yes, so they assign me to that precinct. I go into that precinct, Joe, and there are these two cops, Sonny Israel and Curly Altamali. They're listening. And, oh my God. So the story got all over the precinct. So it's that sort of starts to build the reputation that I would acquire, Randy Jurgensen. They're in the precinct, they told everybody in the precinct, and it doesn't stay in the precinct. So anyway, as I finish the academy, I am now assigned, as I told you, to the 25th precinct, Joe. And when I get there, on the stairs is Sonny Grosso. And Sonny Grosso is a cop, and he's in the 25th precinct. Welcome, Randy, hug arms. From that day on, Joe, from that day on, which I would say was probably 1959, 1958, we were inseparable. We worked together. Not always at the same time. We worked on the same cases. So I do a year and a half in the 25th precinct, and I am now sent down on an interview to become an undercover narcotics police officer. We were called cops then. And I go down and I'm being interviewed, and it's more of a Q&A. And the man that was the head of that unit at that particular time was Lieutenant Mario Biaggi. And Lieutenant Mario Biaggi would go on to be a congressman from, the city of New York. So, where are you born? And one of the questions was, are you the cop that was taking numbers? And the next thing I know, I'm undercover narcotics. Now, who's down there? Sonny Grosso. Now, time goes by, and I'm working, Joe, out in the street, and I'm buying narcotics. I never had a problem of being undercover. Back then the image of the police officer, or cops, if you want, basically, I'm going to make up a figure here, but I'm going to say that 90% of the cops were Irish.
Wow.
All the police commissioners, all the high-ranking officers, the captains and the inspectors. And now this is 1960, 1961. So now the Second World War is over, 15 years?
Just about.
16 years? Well, guess who all these captains are? Guess who the police commissioners are? They're all Second World War, combat veterans, that are now in the police department. And the police department has always been a semi-military, I'm going to call it organization. And it's never been less than 30,000, 32,000, 34,000. And, there are countries, Joe, that don't have an army that size. So here I am belonging to, an organization that's 80%, 85%, military, if you will, ex-military men. So at that time now, we're beginning to draw and get Korean veterans that are in. I'm one of them. Sonny Grosso is one of them. So we're in narcotics now, and I'm making street buys. And when I make the street buys, I go up and I make the buy. Usually it was like $75 half load, and it's not the drug of choice. It is the drug, and it's heroin. It is heroin, and it really hasn't. At this time, it really hasn't drawn the attention that it should. That it should. And I'm going to say something that I'm going to be called out. I'm going to be called out on, but it's because it really wasn't out in white America. And when that drug, burst onto the scene within white America, you understand? Oh my God! Now we've got a problem. Now we've got a drug problem. Was there a drug problem there all along? Yes, it was. So now, as time goes on, I'm buying these drugs. Let me take something out of the time frame here. In 1972, President Nixon declared war on drugs. Remember, this story is still back in the 60s. So President Nixon declares war on drugs in 1972. Joe, as I sit here, I will tell you I can back it up with facts. By 1975, we've lost that war, and we've never recovered. We have never recovered. We've never gotten out in front of the drug problem. Is the way we treat it, the way we look at it, is it a crime? Is it a social issue? Is it a racial issue? We have never really gotten out in front of it. So now, going back to 1961, 62, I'm undercover and I'm buying drugs out in the street. And of course, then the backup would come after I would make the buy, and that they would take the place out, And once you got that guy, that was running that operation, it's now, look, you're going to jail. This is what's going to happen unless you, and of course, they roll over and say where they're getting it from. And so you can see we're going up the chain here.
You want the top dogs.
Okay, so now, while this is going on, Sonny Grosso, and it is Sonny Grosso, is working from the top down. They're now really wiretapping, absolutely. They're working from the top down. And the end of my narcotic time was, it's like 1962, 1960, right around in there. They, Sonny Grosso, Eddie Egan. In the meantime, there is a life outside of what we do. I lost Sonny Grosso a couple of weeks ago. He passed away, and at the eulogy, his family got up and they were speaking about him, and his friends got up and speaking about him, and in his life, in the priority, what came first before family was being a cop. Being a cop. I now find that to be true about me, not walking in Sonny's footsteps. Nothing came before doing the job. And there was a cost. There really was a cost.
I mean, we're in the 60s from what we've talked about, but I mean, when we get to Circle of Six and everything like that, you could just see, I mean, the drive that you had. I mean, you just documented so well how committed you were to finding the killer. I mean, you could just see from your words how that flowed through everything that you did.
Right. Yes. So what would happen is that I'd make the buy, I'd do this, and we got to go to court, and they put me in a room because they put me in a room, and the people that I bought from, they deny it and so forth and so on. So they would take that person and they would walk him into the back of the courtroom, and they would just open up the door, and I'd say hi, and they'd close the door, and then the guy would come out and he'd plead guilty. And there was really a lot of that. So in 1962, I was really way on the outside. They make the bust, and it's going to be the bust of the century, if you will. And they arrest a man and a number of others, and his name is Patsy Fuqua. And they make the Patsy Fuqua case, and they seize. Now, remember, this is 1960. This is 1962. They seize $32 million of heroin. There have been quantity-wise, there have been larger seizures, but quality, no. This was 87 to 89% pure. This drug could be stepped on, 7 times. In today's market, no exaggeration, this would net gross $500 million.
Oh my goodness.
On the street. That's what they seized back then. And to boot, they got $480,000. The money is never usually with the drugs. That was a separate collar. I think it was $490,000. $10,000 short of $500,000 because that's what the mule got for carrying the money. So that case was made. Now, the drugs would later on, we would see later on where the drugs came in from. Remember, I was just really on the outside of this. So what I wanted to say is, all my time in narcotics down there, the same as Sonny. I mean, as exhausted and as we would make a collar like in the shooting gallery. Somebody was in there that was wanted for murder. Not so much the drugs. You know what I mean? So we would go down and we would take these places out. Very dangerous doing that. Very dangerous doing that. There usually was a gun involved, and we would just go down, break the door down, round them up, charge them all with the drugs, with the sole purpose of getting that one person that was wanted for murder, a serious assault, a rape, whatever it was. Okay? So we would do that. That would take us all night. Then we would definitely go to court. We would definitely go to court, and that would take us basically all day, the arraignment and so forth. I got a couple of stories about that. And then before you know it, with bags under our eyes, Sonny says, let's go to Copa. And off we didn't go home. We went to the Copa. And if we weren't going to the Copa, if there was a night game, we went to the Yankees. I mean, and virtually after the Copa, 12, 1 o'clock at night, and of course that's where they started to make this Patsy Fuker case, long before it was called the French Connection. And I can't tell you how many times that was the kind of life that we led. Sometimes if it would end at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, Eddie Egan would say, come on, let's go down to Wall Street. I know a bunch of cocktail waitresses down there. You know what I mean? We're going to go down there and so forth and so on. And some of those stories are just hilarious. So what I'm saying to you, all while that is going on, you can see that if there is if there's a home life, if there's any, that sort of came. It was never neglected. Don't get me wrong, but that sort of came second.